in.
September 23rd.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's, I guess, the third day of Sukkot.
Right. Right. Very good. Thank you.
All right. If we're in person and it's
September
nice weather.
23rd.
More sukkah if it's.
Right. If we're in person and it's nice weather, we could even potentially learn in the sukkah, which is very, very nice. Okay. I don't think that Gary was on with us last week, was he? Oh, you were.
It was, yeah.
You were, but had the baby been born yet when you were with us last week?
No, I don't think so. Was I there last week?
I
Yeah.
think you were, because
Were
yeah,
there?
Elle was with us and you were, but I can't remember if that was before or after the baby was born.
I think it was
Just
after.
after.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Well, I don't know if we had a chance to say Mazel Tov to Gary, but Mazel Tov to Gary on the birth of a granddaughter.
Thank you so much.
Mazel tov.
Thank you. Yeah. It's just a wonderful thing. So, and to have a new life named after someone close to us who has, passed away within the past year has been really.
Wow.
Yeah.
What's her name?
Hmm?
What's
Her
her name?
name. So, her English name is Molly, Molly, Beena, Beena.
Beautiful.
Beautiful.
And her Hebrew name is Devorah Malka.
Wow.
Beautiful. All right. Well, should we jump into it?
Can I just say I have to leave early? So I'll just slip out. Don't want to interrupt anything. I appreciate this class so much and I'm glad it will continue.
Well, me too. Thanks for letting us know, Vicky. And if it's just been a joy to learn with you and to learn with everybody this year. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation in months ahead. All right, so we're gonna get closer to the end of the Adam and Eve story, and what I may do is actually next fall shift to a different part of the Torah just to keep things fresh. But we'll get close to the end of the Adam and Eve story today, so we won't feel like we've abandoned it before it's time. And if there's popular demand to continue with like the final, the concluding verses of that story, we can. But I was thinking maybe we could either go on to Cain and Abel or Noah and the flood. So that's my thinking for the fall. All right, let me share our screen here. Okay. Okay, so we're still in the punishment given to the woman, to Eve. It's not called Eve yet, but the woman. Okay, so your craving shall be for your husband, or your desire shall be for your husband. The word chukah, craving, appears only 4 times in the entire Torah. So it lists below what those other 4 times are. Let's see, number 105. I'm sorry, listed in the Midrash. Why is it used here? So the Midrash explains. Okay, this is a common Midrashic move, right? To basically like act as a concordance and to see how the same word is used in other contexts, especially if it's a rare word, how it's used in other contexts, and to understand how it might how that might illuminate what it means or why it's used in our context. Okay, so our Chukot hen, there are 4 cravings in the Torah. This one, a woman's craving is only for her husband. As it states, your craving shall be for your husband. Okay, the evil inclination's craving is only for Cain and his fellow sinners. As it states, it's craving toward you. Okay, so this is obviously the next major story in the book of Genesis is the story of the sons of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. And we can look at that verse if you like. But basically, the idea there is that sin lies in wait for you through jealousy. So the evil inclinations craving is only for Cain and his fellow sinners, or actually sinners there is in brackets, right? So it's Cain v'chavirav in Hebrew, Cain and his friends or his fellows. Okay, so that's two. So we have in reference to Eve, in reference to Cain. The craving of the rains is only for the earth. Okay, so that is in the book of Psalms. As it states, you paid heed to the earth and caused it to be craved. So when it says Torah here, by the way, that there are 4 cravings in the entire Torah, what it means is Tanakh, what it means is the entire Bible. And the craving of the Holy One, blessed is God, is only for Israel. Shinem, as it says, his craving is for me. Now, this is from the Song of Songs, and their rabbinic tradition typically understands Song of Songs as an allegory for the love between God and the Jewish people. Chances are good that it was not written as an allegory, that it was written actually as erotic poetry or as love poetry. But the rabbis, at least, are maybe it's because they have like kind of a puritanical streak, a sort of prudish streak, and they want to read it as an allegory of the love for God, between God and Jewish people. So in this case, right, the word chukah shows up there. And it says that God's craving is for me, for the people Israel. Let's keep going a little bit, okay? Because it's going to go on to talk about another interpretation of that Song of Songs passage. So another explanation of the word chukato, his craving, is as follows. Israel says, we are weak, but even though we are weak, we hope for the salvation of the Holy Blessed One, and we proclaim the oneness of his name every day. So it's explaining chukah there in the other direction, right? That we crave God, or I crave God, right? The people crave God, and the craving that we have for God is for God's redemption, right? Is sort of yearning for God's salvation, for God's deliverance. Okay, so let's pause there, right? We have what's commonly called a Gezerah Shava, or a series of Gezerah Shavas, which connect other times that this term is used in the Torah that's meant to illuminate how it's used in our passage. So what are your thoughts? What do these different instances of the same word have to tell us about how and why that word is used in our passage? Just as a reminder, right, it shows up in relation to Eve, shows up in relation to Cain, it shows up in relation to the earth's desire for the rain, the rain's desire for the earth, and for Israel's desire, or rather God's desire for Israel, God's craving for Israel, God's yearning for Israel, or some say the other direction, right? Israel's yearning for God. So what does that illuminate about our passage? What does that tell us about how or why that same phrase is used here, the same term is used here. This is like a an SAT prep, right?
This may be kind of risky, but I'll take a risk. It's something beyond totally rational. There's emotional, I'm not sure is the right word, but it's something beyond our total control in a sense. I don't know how else to explain it, but
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think that's right. I think that, craving denotes sort of like primal urge, right? That it's I think I'm like thinking of this just shows how much TV I watched growing up, but I'm like I'm thinking of like cartoon characters, like the Domino's Noid, craving pizza, or like Chester the Cheetah craving Cheetos, or the Trix Rabbit, just like just jonesing for tricks all the time, right? He's not thinking about it.
So I mean, I see these as all, kind of urges based on physicality, right? Based on, especially, where it really comes out is the rain and the earth.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, these are like fundamental physical urges, which, obviously for the human being and, for other animals relates to the sexual reproductive urge, right? I mean, but the issue is that it's all in terms of basic physicality, I think.
Right, and I think that that's a really important point to make here. I mean, the rain for the earth is very illustrative here, because the desire of rain for the earth is gravitational, right? It's that's where it's going to fall.
Totally material.
Right.
Got a problem.
Built into nature. It's not a learned behavior. It's built into nature.
I got a problem.
Yeah, Norman.
And it has to do with the misogyny of the whole passage. The first craving mentioned is a woman's craving is only for her husband. There's no corollary craving. A man's craving is only for his wife. I mean, does that mean it's okay for men to have affairs, but not for women to have affairs?
Well,
what we're learning.
So listen, from the point of view of Torah, this is an uncomfortable thing to say, but you're absolutely right in pointing this out, Norman. Right? But from the point of view of Torah and rabbinic literature, men are able to have as many partners as they want, so long as the women involved are not otherwise married to other men. Right. So in the Torah, men have multiple wives, and where they, even if they're not married to another woman, Judah, for example, sleeps with the prostitutes, right? And there's no real moral judgment of that, especially considering the prostitute that he sleeps with is his daughter, but or is it his daughter-in-law? Mm-hmm. It's just sort of unremarkable that he does. So, I think it's debatable. I'm not by any stretch of the imagination an expert in this, although I'm probably not the first to remark that that men tend to be sort of naturally less inclined toward monogamy than than women might seem to be. You know, like for biologically, male species and males and other species look for multiple partners, right? Because they want to reproduce as much as possible, but one female can only carry their genes at one time, or one at a time, or maybe two at a time. And so so there might be a biological disposition toward that. I think that might be debatable though, and whole new areas, I say new by like the last half century, areas exploring human sexuality probably does a lot to disprove that sort of classical or historic assumption about the difference between men and women, and that women are just as inclined to be attracted to multiple partners as men are. But I think that is one of the assumptions of this rabbinic text, right? Or even maybe of the Torah, right? One of the things that the Torah is doing in Genesis is giving an etiology, right? So like, how did people get to be the way they are, right? And it's quite possible that that based on the sort of social conditions in the time and place where the Torah was written, the author would look around and say, why is it that men seem to want to sleep around, but women remain loyal to their husbands, by and large, unless there's some issue, right? And the Torah is replete with examples of women being castigated and even executed for infidelity, because that there's a huge taboo around that in biblical society. But there isn't a huge taboo around men having multiple partners, even married men having multiple partners. So that could be what the Torah is doing here in Genesis, is saying like, how did it get to be that way? And and they say, well, it's been like that since time immemorial. It's because of something women did wrong. That may not make this issue much any more comfortable, right? But that could be what's going on here.
A
It's
question.
further evidence that men wrote it.
Yes. Although there are theories out there, there's a book called The Book of J. So this is actually not a unique theory to the Book of J, but and I can't remember now who wrote it. I'll go look it up in a second. But the Book of J argues that there is takes this idea that there are multiple authors of the Torah, right? That the Torah itself is a kind of a weaving together of multiple sources. But it argues that there is actually a unified work that forms the core of the Torah, even as there are other sources woven in. It says that core is the Book of J. The traditional documentary hypothesis is that there are four authors or author traditions: J, E, P, and D. So J is the Yahwist, E is the Elohist, P is the priestly author, and D is the Deuteronomist. And so the Book of J constitutes, according to this theory, much of the Book of Genesis, much of the Book of Exodus, and some of the Book of Numbers, and then also I think Judges, and I think parts of Samuel and Kings too, potentially, and says that that's a unified work, and that's so it's not a theory unique to this book, the Book of J. Other biblical scholars have proposed this, and they make compelling cases. The thing unique about the Book of J is that he argues, that author argues, I can't remember now who wrote the book, is a literary critic, not necessarily a biblical scholar, but he argues that the Book of J was written by a woman. And so that would be, I think it's hard to make that argument. It's hard to make that argument doubly so without being kind of essentialist about what a female author would write and what a male author would write, right? If you read, I don't know, Moby Dick, right, but didn't know that Herman Melville wrote it, could you tell that it was written by a man versus a woman? I mean, how could you tell that, right? So,
excuse me, what is the name of this author you're referring to?
yeah. So, hold on, I gotta now look up the author of that book. Give me a second. Harold Bloom.
I suspected that.
And I suspected that too.
Why is that?
He's a very, very famous literary critic, but also a critic of American culture, the direction of American culture. He's very much in favor of intense study of the canon. Right?
Mhm.
And he's also long been controversial. He died recently.
Oh, really? Right.
And recently have a speaker who was trying to degenderize the Bible.
Yes, right. So she spoke to us last week, and Vicky just suggested. I think that you're right. What she would say about this passage, right? She does this with the genders flipped, right? So her version, what she calls Torah Ta, would say, yet your craving will be for your wife, right? She actually showed this to us last week, I think. Right, to say that the man, that the places of the man and woman in her story are flipped, right? And so the man is the one that's seduced by the serpent, who's now a female serpent, and the man gets this punishment, right? Which is that your craving shall be for your wife. Now, how what that reveals or what that changes, I think, is in the eye of the beholder. But anyway, let me just finish this one thought, is that Harold Bloom, argues that Jay was written by women, and one of the reason by a woman, and one of the arguments for that is a woman kind of reflecting on why is it that our society is set up in such a patriarchal way, right? Sort of a woman kind of like self-reflecting on her own place in the world, rather than a man sort of justifying, why it is that, men are in charge, women can only marry one man at a time, but men can sleep with whoever they want, right? Those are two different ways of looking at the story. One is kind of a justification, saying that, see, the way things are is the way they ought to be because of what women did, right? And our place in this is justified. If a woman writes this, right, it may very well be saying the way things are is the way they are, but it's a corruption of the natural state of things, right? It shouldn't be that women, only get to have one partner, and men don't, right? It's because things got messed up somewhere along the line.
I think you picked up on something there. I think we have to make a distinction between what is theological and what is anthropological or even sociological. What we have in Torah is theological, if we put aside the historical critical theory of pulling it apart, as was done last week, for example. But I don't see, from a strictly theological point of view, how there would be any inequality there. And I emphasize that, strictly from a theological point of view.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah. Are you familiar, Rabbi, with a scholar by the name of David Daube?
What's the last name?
Daube, D-A-U-B-E.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. He was a Jewish scholar. Some background on him that may take a few moments. He was born in Germany, in an Orthodox family. In 1909, I believe, he, at the age of 25, I think in 1934, having seen the handwriting on the wall with Hitler's coming to power in the year before. He goes to England. He teaches law at Cambridge. Later, he comes to the United States and teaches law at Berkeley. He died at the ripe old age of 90 in 1999.
Right.
I'm
I'm looking at his Wikipedia page now.
And in light of Yael's presentation last week, I was reviewing some of the things. In fact, I very much enjoyed that. I thought she gave a very charismatic presentation. And I even watched it again on YouTube last Sunday. If I may read, this came out quite by coincidence. A couple of paragraphs here that David Dalby wrote. He was invited to give lectures, the Jordan lectures at Cambridge in 1952. And they were later collected in a book called The New Testament in Rabbinic Judaism. One of those essays in there, and I'll throw this out for whatever people think it's worth, is entitled The Interpretation of a Generic Singular. This particular essay, being delivered in 1952, was a redoing of a work he published in the Jewish Quarterly Review in 1945. So the idea has been around for a while. I don't say it's unique to him, but if I can read a couple rather long paragraphs, is that okay?
That's fine with me.
Okay. He starts out this way. The Haggadah about the creation of man too, the rabbis turned to a generic singular into a specific one. The interpretation was famous in the Talmudic era, and quite conceivably, Paul, that's the Apostle Paul, drawing on an earlier essay here, is drawing on it also. The Bible tells us that God created man in his image. In the image, God created him, male and female, he created them. And again, and I'll use quotes here. In the day that God created man, in the likeness of God made he him, male and female, created he them, and called their name Adam, end quote. An ordinary reader would ascribe a generic sense to the word man, in quotes, and he, in quotes. The sense of a, in quotes, here, man and a woman, end quote, or maybe even that of mankind, in quotes. The rabbis could not have admitted this, since if they had, there would have been a conflict with the story of Eve's formation from the rib of Adam. In consequence, they emphasized the curious wavering in the verses quoted between the singular and the plural. Man, God created man, in quotes, and him, in quotes. Yet at the same time, he created them, in quotes, male and female, and called their name Adam. This wavering was declared to prove what was traditionally assumed anyhow, that the first ideal man was androgynous. That is to say, the plural, it was held, indicated not several beings, but one composite being. And the singular was not of a generic character. It did not denote mankind, but it was a specific singular. It denoted one human being only, the first bisexual one. And I think he uses bisexual here in a little bit different
Right.
than we would use it today. A bisexual one, out of whom Eve was subsequently taken. That this explanation is ancient would be probable, even if there were no other evidence from the consideration that the two accounts of man's creation in chapters 1 and 2 of Genesis must have called for a harmonization from the moment the canon was treated as a faultless whole. Indeed, a tendency to harmonize is perhaps noticeable in the biblical accounts themselves. Fortunately, evidence is not lacking. According to a tradition preserved in numerous sources, among them the Melchitha, the clause, quote, male and female created he them, end quote, was one of the passages altered by the authors of the Septuagint in order to prevent misunderstanding on the part of King Ptolemy. They translated, quote, a male with his female parts created he them, end quote, or male and female, that is bisexual, created he him, a singular and a plainly specific singular. Whether or not the tradition is historical, it is difficult to believe that no Greek renderings of the kind described were in circulation. It could not have arisen unless the teaching, which it presupposes the androgynous Adam, had been of considerable age. Actually, as we tried to show elsewhere in the same lectures, the interpretation of, quote, male and female, he created them, end quote, as alluding to the ideal androgynous man occurs in the Gospels as well as in Philo, and Paul himself in 1 Corinthians and Ephesians not only adopts the doctrine that sexual intercourse restores man and woman to an androgynous state, but even uses a verse from Genesis 2 in support of it. For another thing, the Hebrew text wavers between singular and plural. It starts by using the singular man. God created man in his image, and then goes on to put the plural them in quotes, quote, male and female created he them, end quote. What sort of being might it be? The rabbis asked themselves, of whom one could equally well speak in the singular or plural. Again, the answer was that the verse must refer to the androgynous man, and that is the key here, the androgyny of Genesis. That what you have here is essentially, and I would add this to it using a metaphor from the Tanakh itself. If we look upon human beings, and Adam, which is actually a human being, how is that word used? Is it used as a singular? Is it used as a plural? At the time of creation, we can look upon male and female as one piece of pottery. The image is used in Jeremiah, for example, and a couple of other places as well. Take that pottery and break it, and you have two shards. They are separated along a break that is irregular. They're separate. As we put them together, we are putting man and woman together. They are equal and they follow one whole. One of the consequences, I think, of this theory, this androgynous theory, is that, of course, we know Eve is the one who first eats the forbidden fruit. She has sinned. As soon as we read that, we must then know that Adam too must sin. When Eve eats from that fruit, we have only, you might say, half a sin. It's not the sin of an Adam, of a human being, seeing this in the plural as opposed to the singular, until Adam eats the fruit as well. So theologically speaking, and I underscore theologically, they are equal in the eyes of God. Man and woman come together. This is also seen, we know, for example, that God says in the first chapter of Genesis, be fruitful and multiply. Did Adam and Eve have sex organs? How could they not if God had said that? So the very act of the sexual act of human generation itself is the bringing together these two pieces of the shard into one whole. That's all I have to say. You asked me, so I told you. So I throw that out there. What do you think?
Kabbalah says that when the human being was created, they were two individuals that were sealed back to back, right? And one was male, had male organs, and one had female organs. But they needed to be separated because they couldn't, neither one could see behind them, right? I mean, or so the idea is actually that there was a hermaphroditic origination of the human being that was then subsequently divided into male and female.
I think that's right. Again, theologically speaking, God looks upon male and female as one.
Yes, but so the challenge I have is that I don't know how I read this passage in light of that understanding, right? And going back to Norman's question, which sort of like took us down this path, why is it then that only the woman is given the punishment, your desire will only be for your husband.
Because of it, it is what happens after Eden.
Right. I mean,
I
another
mean,
another example that has nothing to do with sex is slavery. Okay. In the beginning, God says that every single human being is made in the image and everyone is equal, right? And then subsequently, you have all the laws to deal with how you handle slaves. So, what was ideal in the beginning becomes somewhat altered, most likely to,
that is man's creation.
well, I think it's
Yep.
God giving into man's nature in a sense, right?
Good point, because I was also going to follow up with what I just said in comment to what you've said, Gary, is that as far as Tanakh is concerned, God sanctions slavery because there are sections where he regulates it.
Right.
There are prescriptions as to what you can do and can't do with slaves and so on and so forth. If
But the creation
slavery was
story-
forbidden, he would have abolished it.
The creation story doesn't include the concept of slavery.
Right, it doesn't.
The only thing it does include is the concept of evil, of murder, actually.
Slavery does occur later. There's the rule that you have to free your slaves in the 7th year. Isn't that right?
Right.
That's
yeah.
correct, right? I mean, that's what Gary is referring to. I think that the later in Exodus, then Leviticus, the Bible, the Torah assumes the reality of the ongoing reality of slavery and accommodates it and also restricts it.
Same thing with animal sacrifice.
Right.
I mean, every other nation was doing animal sacrifice. And so, the accommodation was, okay, you build the temple, you guys, do your animal sacrifice. If we're going to do them, this is how we're going to do them. Right. But it was a concession. It was a concession to human nature.
Does God need to concede to man?
Well, so, I mean, when you look at it, as a narrative, right? When you look at it allegorically, right? God makes this human being and doesn't really know what's going to happen, right? And what's the first thing that happens? One kills another one, right? And then the next thing that happens is you have a whole generation of horrible people that have to be wiped out, right? I mean, I don't think God anticipated that. I mean, God, did God anticipate, the original sin, that they would eat from the fruit that was placed in the garden?
He made human beings free, and he must have been quite surprised at their behavior.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Yes.
That's why
I know that by the concept of free will, that God gave mankind free will and therefore did not control what happened after that.
Right. And then he realized, okay, I'm going to have to make some concessions if we're going to continue to have a relationship here.
Right. I mean, that's, I was learning with Yitz Greenberg, Rabbi Yitz Greenberg, a number of weeks ago, and he makes that argument, right, that the Torah sets out the ideal of human equality, and the sort of infinite value of human dignity in Genesis 1. But much of the Torah is a sort of like accommodation to the reality of human nature, kind of giving meeting human beings where they actually are to get them to strive for where God envisions them becoming, right? Envisions us becoming and envisions the world becoming. So for Yitz, the ultimate goal is the repair of the world, and so but in order for that to happen, God has to meet human beings where we are, because otherwise we'll never be able to be on board with the larger project.
But none of that, of course, would have been necessary if there had been no fall in the first place. You know, one thing we haven't talked about here in terms of Eden is what was before the fall, before the eating of the fruit, the forbidden fruit. What was the status, if you will, of Adam and Eve in Eden? They were with God. Now, later on, we find out in Torah, as Moses experienced, no one shall see the face of God and live. Did Adam and Eve see the face of God? Well, he's right there with them, Genesis tells us, in Eden. They hear him walk. Surely they would have seen him too.
They hear him walk after they eat from the tree. So we don't know. I don't know where they are in. You know, if I was blocking this movie, I don't know if I would put God in a scene with Adam and Eve, except for when God was making Adam and Eve. It doesn't say anything. It doesn't say anything about that.
No, not specifically, no. But what do we infer from it?
I don't know. I
He
mean,
takes
I
the
don't
rib
know.
from Adam to make Eve, and
So what I was told by in a lesson with Rabbi Kibatatz is that Adam Kadmon, who was this hermaphrodite creature, could not sin because the evil inclination was external, right? It was outside. So the greatness of Adam Kadmon was that his natural inclination was to do the right thing. And then what happens is and in a sense, the snake is the representative of the Yetzer Hara.
mm-hmm.
And that the eating of the fruit means that Yetzer Hara, which had been external, right? So like the way he described it is like Adam sinning would be like him turning around and cutting a leg off. Right? He would be as inclined to sin as he would be to remove part of his body. I mean, so it wasn't an inclination that was internal to him. But after the fruit, that Yetzer Hara now was internal. And now the battle was on within, right? With inside him
After eating
the apple.
Yeah, I hear that argument. I have problems with it for a couple of reasons. One is, and it's a problem that's kind of evident in the analogy that the Midrash just gave us, right? In a way, it tends to equate the Yetzer Hara with the woman, right? So the analogy that I know it's not directly, right? But the woman is the reason why the man internalizes the fruit. Right. And here, right, it says, so if you follow the analogy, right, a woman is to her husband like the evil inclination is for Cain. Right. That's what this Midrash says.
No, but you're right. But that's a total misreading of what
I think so too.
I mean, it's a total misreading because Eve was doing this out of the goodness. She wasn't doing this as a sin. She didn't see it as a sin. She saw it as if I could, eat this apple and have a greater knowledge, I could serve my creator more effectively.
She was still being disobedient.
Well,
is the eating of the apple or whatever the fruit was the beginning of the imperfection of the world? I mean, in Genesis, at each stage of creation, God says, and it was good. Yes, or somebody says it was good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Except for human beings who he says are very good.
Yes.
So he created a world that was good. So why does it need repair?
It's not perfect.
What happened to it?
Yeah, right. It's good, not perfect.
Okay.
That's actually so. I think I've said that my motivation for doing this class was I was trying a few years ago now. I was trying to start writing a series of children's books about the weekly Torah portion, and my thought about the Genesis story was that it was a story about overcoming perfectionism, right? And God had to realize that good was good enough. And right, it didn't create a perfect world. I'm still trying to figure out what my take on the Adam and Eve story was, which is why I like started looking at the midrash of these in the first place. But yeah, so I think there are two ways of looking at it, right? One is that God deliberately created an imperfect world, right? It was good but not perfect. Two is that the world became imperfect through this sin. Evil was introduced into the world through this sin. Or three, God is not capable of creating a perfect world, and needs the partnership of human beings. I know Joe has a problem with that, but
Well, I mean, actually, when you look at the creation story, there was tohu vivohu before there was ever any mention of
right,
any type of creation.
right.
So there was disorder is the natural state of
Right.
being, right?
This is
And God is putting this kind of cap on it, right? I mean, trying to hold it in, and you can think of Tov and Ra as being Ra favors disorder and Tov favors order. It's not necessarily good and evil. It's a question of, what allows order to sustain itself versus, disorder to, kind of overrule order.
Can I throw one more wrench into this conversation? Inspired by our class, I read Elaine Pagel's book, The Origins of Satan, which is a great read. And she quote, now I can't remember exactly what it was, but she quotes an early church father who read the Adam and Eve, who read this story with God and the serpent reversed, right? He said that actually in the story, the serpent is God, and God, the character called God in the story, is Satan.
Who's the father? Church father.
I don't remember off the top of my head. I'll have to go back and look at it. I just remember the take on it, which was just dizzying, right? To think about that. And like he made a really good argument, right? He's like, what kind of God would not want human beings to know the difference between good and evil, right? What kind of God would not want human beings to have their eyes open, right? He says because God in the story is not God, right? It's Satan playing at God, and God is present in the serpent, trying to get the human beings to come into their fullness.
That's similar to what Yael does in her.
Yeah.
Reversing roles.
Although I don't think that he was doing it as like a subversive reading, deliberately subversive reading. I think that was his theology, right? His theological take on it.
Oh, you're finishing with a bang, guys.
Well, here, why don't we just take a couple more minutes? We can get a little bit further in this midrash. So here we go. Okay, so the midrash now offers another interpretation of Eve's curse. So another explanation. Yet your craving shall be for your husband. We're about to get into more misogynistic territory here. Okay. Yet your craving shall be for your husband. When a woman sits on the birthing stool, suffering the intense pain of labor, she exclaims, "From now on, I will never again cohabit with my husband." But by the way, this is some rabbinic, some classical commentaries interpretation of why in the book of Leviticus a woman has to bring a sin offering after having childbirth. And the reason is because she might swear during childbirth falsely or improperly. She might swear that I'm never going to have sex with my husband again. And so she has to bring a sin offering after that to break the vow, basically. But anyway, so from now on, I will never cohabit with my husband, which I imagine plenty of women have said during the course of childbirth.
During transition.
Or during transition, right? But the Holy One, blessed is God, says to her, "You shall return to your craving. You shall return to the craving of your husband." Right. So in other words, right, like it's going back to, right, it's like gravity, right? That gravitational pull will always be there. You'll bounce back from it. And now I don't, again, like if we're making a movie of this or you're dramatizing this, would you say God's line here in a conciliatory way? Are you comforting her, right? Don't worry about it. Like things will get better, right? Or you say, or you, kind of, is this a punishment, right? Is this chastising, right? Saying, oh yes, you will.
Yeah, well, when I was in training on the OB service, we used to say to the mother right after the delivery, "We'll see you next year," and she'll say, "Damned if you will."
Yeah, right. Not over my dead bodies.
That's right.
Well, this is why, human beings, this is why we forget, right? Because if we didn't forget, then no one would ever have a second child. And let's just finish the page. So Rabbi Brechia and Rabbi Simon said in the name of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, because the woman wavered in her heart when she vowed to abstain from conjugal relations, she must therefore bring a wavering offering. I don't know what a korban merufraf is. Let's look at the commentary there. It's not a normal sin offering, but it's a
winged offering, right? Where the wings are wavering.
I guess, yeah. But that's a phrase that I'm not familiar with, and it's not a biblical phrase. It's a rabbinic invention. But anyway, she brings a bird offering, right? Of a fluttering offering.
Right, roof
flutters. I guess it's saying that women are flighty.
Oh boy.
I didn't say it. The rabbi said it. I didn't say it.
Telling you guys, men wrote this.
Men definitely wrote it.
Under stress, anybody can begin to lose their certainty. Right? And so, yeah, the fluttering, I like that.
What is the Hebrew word?
Merufraf.
Which is really cool because it's a typical Hebrew form where you have a repetition of two letters.
It's not quite an onomatopoeia. I don't know what you would call this. I'm sure there's a term, and I bet you it's German.
Well, think about what the sound that you hear when a bird is rapidly waving its wings, right? Roof, 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 roof.
I will say that Yael wrote to me after our class, and she was wondering, is it typical in Bethel classes for the women participants to be quieter than the male participants? And I said, no, I hadn't noticed that, but that maybe shows my gender bias or my gender blind spot. So I want to make sure that I've heard a lot of male voices in this conversation, and it's a text that probably could use a female voice or two.
Is she in Richmond?
No, she's in New York.
Oh, New York. Okay.
No comment.
Vicky, any thoughts about this?
I don't have any problem speaking up when I have something to say.
I know you don't.
I don't.
So I appreciate that.
All of you know me and know that I have no trouble saying what I'm thinking.
Well, since we've gotten so serious, I want to put in a comic element. For some reason, while we were discussing this, the nursery rhyme Humpty Dumpty came to me, and talking about, the man and the woman together, and then after the fall, they split. So I don't know, it just sort of hit me in a funny way that, Humpty Dumpty sat on the wall, had a great fall. All the king's horses and all the king's men, maybe being God, couldn't put them back together again.
Quite interesting.
That is a great metaphor.
Yeah, I love that.
And what's interesting.
Thank you for being kind.
Yeah. Leonard Cohen has a song called "Lover, Lover, Lover" that he wrote when he went to the Yom Kippur War. He went to support the troops. But when you look carefully at the words, it's basically an appeal to God to give us a second chance, right? A whole new opportunity to start over again.
Oh, wow. I didn't know the backstory of that song. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Well, have you heard the Hebrew version of it?
Mm-mm.
Oh my goodness, it's amazing. It's translated as Anna, Anna, Anna,
Hmm.
right? Just like, in Moses, plea to God for the healing of Miriam.
Yeah, look,
What?
hell no.
Oh,
Good fun, not a lot.
Yeah.
oh,
All right,
Exactly.
guys. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, right.
Anna Rafana Allah.
Right. Or in Psalms, right? Ana Adonai Hoshiana,
Yes.
right? Please.
Yes.
It's like an imploring, please.
It's an imploring of God to say, hey, give us another way to do this, right? Give us a new start.
Oh, that's what happens, isn't it?
Yeah.
In Torah itself.
All right, guys. Well, we are out of time for today. It's been such a joy learning with you all over the course of this program year. And I'm sure I'll see most of you, if not all of you, at various points during the summer. But if I don't, hope everybody has a good summer and safe summer. And we'll continue learning together in the fall.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you so
Rabbi.
much.
thank
Thank you.
you.
Thank
Bye,
you very
everybody.
much. Have a good summer.
Bye-bye.